your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. The top court in Alberta has upheld the conviction of a Calgary pastor for his role in protesting COVID-19 public health measures. He delivered a speech at the blocked Coutts border crossing that was blocked for more than 2 weeks back in February of 2022. Arthur Pawlowski was found guilty of mischief and breaching a release order in connection with the blockade at the Alberta-Montana border. Pawlowski was given 60 days in jail but did not spend any time behind bars after receiving credit for time already served. Arthur Pawlowski of the Street Church joined BCN's Hal Roberts from Calgary to talk about his appeal being rejected.
I am very saddened by the whole state of the so-called justice system in Canada. However, if you look at my life, every single time this horrible thing happens to me, it has a bigger purpose, including my imprisonment. I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book in prison telling the people the entire story. Lions Do Not Bow. It has become last week a bestseller on Amazon.com and .ca. And I'm telling the whole story, how it started, why I said what I said, the Get Out video, the lockdowns, the protests, the rallies, the arrests, imprisonment, house arrest, political, threats, political fixers, attempted bribery by the Alberta's government. All of those things are included in a book. And I think this is a retaliation because I'm calling out the judges. I've called them by name.
Now, prosecutors say during one of your impassioned speeches to truckers at Smuggler's Saloon back in 2022, you convinced them to stay on for another 2 weeks and to not break the line. Now, looking back, is there anything you would have changed? Any regrets?
No, absolutely not. I told them not to break the line, to hold the line. I told them to stand in solidarity with each other. That did not mean block the highway. It meant do not go anywhere else because the eyes of the world are fixed on you, on this sliver of little, pitiful looking land, if you will, Coutts. Whoever heard about Coutts, Alberta? And yet the whole world was watching what those brave men and women were doing, the farmers, the truckers, where they were fighting for their very lives, they were fighting for their careers, they were fighting for their children. So what I said to them is to stand to their convictions and to do it peacefully and to do it with God. That's the job of a shepherd, if you will. That's the job of a pastor.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Arthur. That was Pastor Arthur Pawlowski of Street Church joining us from Calgary. Oh, by the way, 3 of the organizers of the blockade who were also convicted of mischief over $5,000 will be sentenced in January. They're Marco Van Hugenbos, Gerhard George Jansen, and Alex Van Herk.
A member of Lethbridge Police Service has been charged in an off-duty incident. The constable, who cannot be named for privacy reasons, is charged with criminal harassment, mischief, and unlawfully dwelling in a house. Police say it's in relation to domestic matters. The 20-year member of the service was arrested by RCMP on Tuesday and has been suspended with pay. The officer and his family are being offered supports from the LPS during the court process. Well, workers at Covenant Health St. Therese Villa in Lethbridge have entered into negotiations with their employer. According to Curtis Jackson, Vice President of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, Executive Office, Southern Region, they're looking for potential wage increase of 35% over 2 years. He says the offer from the employer is far from that.
When our workers go in and our negotiators go in and state what our financial position is, the employers return with an offer of 7.5% over 4 years. This offer has been repeated regardless whether workers are in healthcare, government sector, post-secondary institutions, and private sector long-term care facilities. So the 7.5% is the same offer everyone is getting at the table. And that's over 4 years. So that breaks down to 2%, 1.75, 1.75. And what we're seeing as a result is we're seeing workers leaving this province in a large amount and going to other provinces where they're paid more.
Jackson says there are now 82,000 public sector workers in negotiations across the province, and they are seeing the same offer across the board. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, the Prime Minister says he's not going anywhere despite several of his own MPs wanting him out. And the Bloc Québécois leader says the time is up for Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government. We dive into that next. Monday was deadline day for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to respond to a request by 24 Liberal MPs calling for his resignation as party leader. Trudeau says he plans to stay on as head of the Liberal Party of Canada. On Tuesday, Trudeau faced another deadline from the Bloc Québécois. Party leader Yves-François Blanchet says his party will vote down the Liberal government after it missed the deadline for passing Bloc legislation on old age security pensions and supply management. Blanchet says time is up for Justin Trudeau and his government.
We said 5 weeks ago that if we were not to receive that, if 4 million of Canadians between 65 and 74 years old were not to receive what we asked, if producers under supply management regime were not to get what we asked, we were to start discussing with opposition parties in order to have this government fall. And this is exactly what we are starting to do as of now.
Meantime, certain MPs within the Liberal caucus are calling for a secret ballot vote on Justin Trudeau's leadership.
We need to be able to address the question of that many people are raising, which is their belief that perhaps someone else should lead us into the next election. I think we need to address that. I think the best way to address that is through a secret ballot vote. Again, it ensures that members of Parliament who are voting can vote their conscience without fear of consequence. Or
if this question still hangs over the Liberal team, do you worry about the effect that has for your party?
Oh yeah, of course I do. But we haven't got the answer yet. So we have the one answer. He intends to stay. Okay, he's the leader until the day he's not. But the other answer, what are we going to do about the fact that his approval ratings are so low, and what are we going to do next to build on what we've accomplished so far? What offering do we have to Canadians to justify them giving us another term in office?
Independent MP Kevin Vuong held a news conference on Parliament Hill to discuss foreign interference in Canada. He says certain politicians need to be held accountable when it comes to interfering with our federal elections.
That one of the individuals who are no longer sitting with the Liberal caucus was the MPP for the riding that I now represent federally. And it's important to note that this is a riding that is not only home to Toronto's Chinatown, but where 1 in 7 of my constituents, like me, are of Chinese heritage. So by association, I think one can only assume to the best of their ability, where there is smoke, there is a lot of fire. There are questions that need to be answered. What precipitated his departure? What did he allegedly do, irrespective of his voting record on China? And I can tell you for a fact that I have never had Toronto's Chinese Consul General on my speed dial, but can others say the same?
Meanwhile, names were being called out this week of those who were allegedly involved with the foreign interference that impacted the country. Sun political columnist Brian Lilly shared some of the names who allegedly knowingly or unknowingly participated.
He named current Liberal Senator Wu and said that he is allegedly dealing with an organization with ties to China. Former Conservative Senator Victor O, also named as working with this committee that works on behalf of Beijing. That's the allegation. But then that China tried to help Liberal MP Parm Bains. Parm Bains ran against and defeated Kenny Chiu. Kenny Chiu has long said that he was a target of foreign interference by China, but the most damning one for the Trudeau government, and they won't talk about it, is the allegation that Mary Ng, currently the trade minister, is someone who was an unwitting participant.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says should his party form government, not only will he scrap the carbon tax, but will also get rid of the federal sales tax on new homes sold for under $1 million. Poilievre says a Tory government would also abolish the Housing Infrastructure Fund. It will set aside $5 billion for agreements with provinces and territories in exchange for adopting certain housing policies. Poilievre says a lot of money for a new home builds go to bureaucrats and not to those who actually build the homes.
In Ontario today, 1/3 of the cost of every new home is direct taxes. That does not include the indirect taxes of, for example, income tax on construction workers and businesses, or all the paperwork and delays and consultants you have to pay just to get the building permits. I'm talking about direct taxes. So let's get this clear. When you buy a new home today, more of the money you spend goes to bureaucrats than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the house.
Since becoming the Conservative leader in September of 2022, Poilievre has gone after the Liberal government over the increase in home prices and rents. Organizers of the Freedom Convoy were in court this week trying to appeal the dismissal of a motion they filed. The anti-strategic lawsuits against public participation motion is part of a $290 million lawsuit filed by Ottawa residents against the Freedom Convoy. In February of 2022, a few Ottawa residents, along with a local union, filed the class action lawsuit against Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, and others. They're seeking damages for the interruptions caused by the parking of trucks and honking of horns in downtown Ottawa during the protest. Lawyers from the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms tried to have the lawsuit dismissed to no avail. John Carpe is the president of the Justice Centre and joins BCN's Hal Roberts earlier this week to discuss this. Take a look.
John, let's chat about your efforts to have this class action lawsuit thrown out.
Well, the action was filed in February of 2022 when the Freedom Convoy peaceful protest was in Ottawa, and Ottawa bureaucrat Zexi Lee and other Ottawa residents were upset about the horn honking, and so they filed the lawsuit and they sought an injunction, and the lawyers acting for the truckers were happy to sign a consent order, no more honking at night, because the truckers also wanted a good night's sleep. So that issue was resolved very quickly, and the horn honking that kept some people awake at night, it did last for a few days or a week, but after that it was gone. But now they're continuing with the action, seeking $290 million over losing some sleep, and the Justice Centre is providing lawyers to counter that, in part because they are seeking to create a new precedent that anybody who donated to Freedom Convoy should be held liable for any damages that result from the peaceful protest.
Now, can you see this case possibly dragging on for years? I mean, it's hard to believe that it may wrap up in a few short weeks.
Unfortunately, we have too few judges in Canada, and all court actions take years and years, and this one is no exception. Where it's at right now is that we tried to get the action dismissed for being an unfair attempt to silence peaceful protests, and we lost at trial on that, and that's now before the Ontario Court of Appeal, where we are seeking to have the case dismissed as just an unfair attack on charter rights and freedoms.
Thanks so much for your time today, John. That was President of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, John Carpe, joining us from the Calgary Airport.
A number of Alberta business owners impacted by the lockdowns and restrictions incurred during the COVID-19 pandemic are celebrating. A judge granted certification for a class action lawsuit to move ahead against the Alberta government. The class action, led by Rebecca Ingram and Christopher Scott, seeks to certify a class on behalf of the many Alberta business owners who lost their businesses and livelihoods during the pandemic. Justice Feasby of the Court of King's Bench of Alberta Alberta said the lawsuit can move forward. To chat about this in more detail is lead counsel for this case, Jeff Rath of the law firm of Rath and Company.
Jeff, what will this potentially mean for so many business owners who lost so much during the COVID-19 pandemic?
It gives individual business owners who were illegally shut down by Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw throughout the pandemic the ability to claim for damages against the Alberta government, both for violations of the rights under the Alberta Bill of Rights, in negligence, and in under a tort called misfeasance in public office. And one of the remarkable things about the judgment is that the judge found that the claim for misfeasance in public office can go forward. He found that there was a very plausible claim to be made out, that when Jason Kenney and his cocktail cabinet decided to hide behind Dina Hinshaw's skirts and pretend that the political decisions that they were making to shut down certain businesses while leaving other businesses open were not purely political decisions and were public health decisions, that constituted misfeasance in public office. And the judge actually certified our ability to seek not just damages, but punitive damages against the Alberta government.
So what kind of financial compensation will your clients be seeking here?
As a class in the billions, but I mean, what we'd be looking at is, each individual, the damages have to be calculated, on the basis of actual losses. I mean, some businesses, very easy to calculate losses. I was talking to one physiotherapist as an example, who advised me that, his weekly billings would be $25,000 a week. And he goes, yeah, and I was shut down for 6 weeks. So, my losses were $150,000. You can just do the math that quickly, right?
Now, Jeff, some people would say the taxpayers are going to suffer the most here because this is really a case of business owners suing the Alberta government. I mean, Jason Kenney's not even premier anymore.
On what basis should those small businesses bear the brunt of the cost of the government's public health measures? Society as a whole should be bearing that cost. The other thing I say to that is that, unfortunately for the government of Alberta, Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw ostensibly were doing the things that they did on behalf of the government of Alberta. So the liability rests with the government, even though, the people making the horrible decisions are no longer there.
So how long do you see this case potentially dragging out?
United Conservative Party AGM is this weekend. I'm hoping that lots of people are going to that AGM, start encouraging Danielle Smith to settle. Everybody watching this, needs to remind Danielle that this is just going to get worse and worse for the government. I mean, the court has opened the door to punitive damages against the Alberta government. Like, when has that ever happened? That'll tell you how bad this looks and how seriously the court is looking at what it was that was done by issuing these phony health orders so that Jason Kenney and company wouldn't be responsible for orders that were issued under the Emergencies Act.
Thanks so much for your time today, Jeff. That was Jeff Rath, legal counsel representing business owners suing the Alberta government for damages incurred during the lockdown mandates of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Saskatchewan party, led by Scott Moe, won another majority government. Moe says even though his party won, he heard the message by voters that people are unhappy in how the province is delivering health care, education, and making life more affordable.
There are many people who voted for the Saskatchewan party in the past, but chose not to in this election. We have lost your support, whether it be due to management of health care or education or the cost of living pressures that we're all feeling in this province and across this nation. All of us in government, and it starts with myself, we're going to take a little bit of time, we're going to reflect on the message that was sent here this evening, to reflect on just what exactly that means. And you have my word that we are going to do that. And we will strive to earn back your support.
The Saskatchewan party was leading or elected in 35 ridings. The NDP were leading or elected in 26. 32 seats were needed for a majority. Meanwhile, in British Columbia, the New Democrats have won a majority of seats following a final count of votes in their provincial election. But Elections BC says 2 seats Kelowna Centre and Surrey Guildford are so close there will be an automatic judicial recount. It says in Kelowna Centre, the difference between the Conservatives and MDP is just 38 votes, and the difference between the two candidates in Surrey Guildford is just 27. NDP leader David Eby says he has already met with Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin to form the next government. He says he'll work hard every day to earn the trust British Columbians have placed in his party. Nova Scotians will be headed to the polls 8 months early. The province's Premier, Tim Houston, called a snap election on November 26. He met with the province's Lieutenant Governor on Sunday to dissolve the General Assembly. Posting on X, Houston said there were two major reasons for the early election: financial pressures and the impending federal election. He says his government is ready to make major new investments in areas such as housing and affordability, but first wants residents to have their say.
We know the importance of lower taxes for economic growth. That's why, if re-elected, a Nova Scotia PC government will continue to lower taxes. I'm pleased to announce we will reduce income taxes across the board by increasing the basic personal exemption from $8,744 to $11,744 for every single tax filer. If you file a tax return, you will feel this change.
Houston also announced a 1% decrease in HST despite a previous plan by the Liberals in Nova Scotia for a 2% decrease. Well, the Alberta government announced proposed changes to the province's Bill of Rights. Premier Danielle Smith says if passed, a few of the amendments would include the right for Albertans to refuse medical care, protecting free speech, and upholding property rights.
No one should be pressured into accepting any medical treatment without their full consent, including a vaccine. If passed, this amendment would protect an individual's right to refuse medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure unless that person lacks the capacity to make a choice or is likely to cause harm to themselves or others. In addition, we're tabling amendments to further protect freedom of speech in our province. Albertans value freedom of speech, and it's something that's already enshrined in the Alberta Bill of Rights. But our proposed amendments would expand the scope of this right to include expressive activities beyond written and spoken language. Freedom of speech is one of the most important hallmarks of a democracy, and so this update is critical. Like it, the protection of property rights is a cornerstone of living in a free society. Albertans are also people who work hard to earn a living, provide for their families, and enjoy the right to acquire property. We will strengthen those rights so no Albertan can be deprived of their property without legal authority and just compensation.
Alberta's United Conservative Party's annual general meeting is being held this weekend in Red Deer. Organizers say it may be one of the largest ever attended, with over 5,000 members registered. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, says it will include Premier Danielle Smith's first leadership review, along with several UCP policies to be discussed, like economic, social, and cultural issues, carbon tax, and net zero emission targets. Here he is with Hal Roberts.
Leadership reviews are totally normal. You know, every party in the country goes through these, but normally you don't go through a leadership review after you've won a majority election. Obviously, the voters liked you. Why would caucus and party membership and whatnot turn around and evaluate them themselves? So it is a really strange situation. And the reason it's worked out like this is because the UCP's sort of governing rules say that there needs to be a review every 3 years. And so, of course, Danielle Smith became party leader in 2022. There was an election in 2023. This is sort of year 3, so to speak. And so she has to go through it. Now, I don't think anyone really expects her to lose. This is not like the leadership review of Jason Kenney. There's no real indication of dissent within caucus. There are certainly some people within the party and the grassroots and some of the sort of quasi-organized activist groups that we've heard so much about that are upset with Danielle Smith for various reasons. But nobody seems to be nearly as organized as they were during the Kenney years. There's no like overwhelming issue that's really fired up members of the party that could lead them to, you know, offer a really tepid show of support for Danielle Smith. So I don't expect any surprises from that. What is I think probably relevant about it, certainly in the folks in the party that I've talked to over the past week or two, is that, to some extent, this is a distraction. The UCP is in government right now. Its legislative agenda is sort of underway as of this week. There are all sorts of other issues across Alberta that they presumably want to pivot towards and tackle: affordability, healthcare, housing, those sorts of things. And yet there's, this political imperative for the Premier and her supporters to make sure that she survives this leadership review on the weekend. And not only survives it, because of course Jason Kenney technically survived it too, with 51% or so of the vote, but also to survive it commandingly. So it's some of the folks I've talked to have said, "Oh, this is just a real distraction from the priorities that the party should be focused on." But come Monday, in theory, everyone's going to be pretty united behind the Premier and ready to get back to work.
Now let's talk about some of the policies up for debate, including one calling for the end of net zero emissions. Now the government say, hey, it's important to recognize CO2. It's a building block for life and important for our plants. We need CO2 here.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different policy proposals that are up for debate. I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of them have to do with sort of social and cultural issues. There's bathroom use rules, more sort of pronoun use, parental rights sort of stuff. There is a lot of that circling around. There's a little bit of sort of bread and butter conservative policy ideas, for opposing the carbon tax. I mean, of course, like there's never going to be a United Conservative Party convention where there's a resolution in favor of a carbon tax. And the net zero one, as you mentioned, which is slightly unusual because of its focus on sort of, I guess, the benefits, you might say, of carbon dioxide, as opposed to the opposition to the net zero policy idea that the federal government has. So I think what is happening here is you have some of the things that I just mentioned, which is the economy, housing, affordability, potential income tax cut, things like that are sort of some of the bigger ideas that are out there that you are, or priority areas out there that you might think of as traditionally sort of small c conservative economic fiscal sort of issues. And then you have the convention, which has a lot of these social and cultural issues that are certainly part of the overall, conservative sort of policy handbook, but are also the things that really, really fire up a lot of members of the party's grassroots, especially a lot of the new members. I'm not talking about the people, who were maybe Wild Rosers 20 years ago or PC voters 20 years ago, but some of the new, really animated people who came in sort of during the pandemic and the years following. And part of the issue from some of the folks I've talked to is that is the stuff, the social, cultural stuff that ends up making the headlines.
As Canadians experience higher costs of living, severe issues with our public health care system, and continued dependence on social programs, a question comes up: has the church dropped the ball in meeting people's needs? Well, after the break, Kelly Stickle, lead pastor of Parallel Church in Lethbridge and author of Let's Take Our Job Back, describes his thoughts on the body of Christ and its first responsibility in meeting the needs of people.